I was kicked to the curb, now they want to hand my house to him. Hey Reddit. Strap in, because this one still feels surreal every time I replay it in my head. I'm Alex, 32, and for most of my life, I thought family was a given, unconditional, unshakable. But last year, my world flipped upside down when the people who swore they loved me decided my home belonged to someone else. It all started 5 years ago, when my parents, let's call them mom and dad, invited my younger half-brother, Jake, now 22, to move in temporarily after he flunked out of college. At first, it was fine. He needed support, they offered it. I was living abroad at the time, so I didn't witness the early friction. But once I returned home for good, the atmosphere had shifted. Dad would swoop Jake off to car shows I used to bond with, Mom fussed over his cooking experiments in my kitchen, and I felt increasingly like a guest in my own childhood home. For months, I chalked it up to growing pains, new family dynamics, adjusting to each other. Then came the subtle signs. It began with offhand remarks, this place needs a fresh coat of paint. I was thinking we could open up the loft into a man cave for Jake. I laughed them off, why wouldn't they want to improve our place? But every suggestion elbowed me further to the sidelines. Birthday dinners turned into, Mom, would you ask Alex to come, texts to Dad, who'd reply, nah, maybe next time. I went from cherished guest to optional extra, and it stung worse than I expected. When my loan payments ballooned, I reached out for advice. Mom loaned Jake, her struggling college kid, $5,000. When I asked, she said, you're doing fine on your own, sweetheart. My own sister secretly quipped, funny how support only flows one way. Then, last November, I got the meeting notice. Dad gently asked me to sign a house distribution agreement, giving my half share to Jake, to keep things simple. I remember laughing nervously, surely this was a prank. But when they slid a lawyer's draft across the table, I realized they were serious. They'd already redrawn the will and insurance papers. My home, my refuge of childhood summers and first heartbreaks, was being reallocated to Jake, the kid they brought in 2 states away. That night, I lay in my old bedroom, walls I'd painted, posters I'd hung, wondering how I'd become the villain in my own story. I knew I had to fight back, but after feeling so unwelcome for years, I wasn't sure where to start. When I woke up the next morning, the weight of that lawyer's draft felt like a punch in the gut. My childhood home, my safe place, was being quietly reassigned to my half-brother, Jake. I took a long look around the room I grew up in, then picked up my phone and called a family law attorney I'd met once at my office holiday party. No dramatic confessions over coffee, just, I need to know my rights if someone tries to transfer my property share without my consent. He got me in 2 days later. At that first meeting, he laid out the basics. As a co-owner on the deed, I had to sign any transfer. And if I suspected undue influence, I could contest changes to the will. That clarity was empowering. I left his office clutching a list, gather original deeds, mortgage statements, anything showing my name, and get it fast. Over the next week, I turned detective. I dug through my email for closing documents, scrolled through old bank statements, and even logged into the county recorder's site to download the deed showing my 50% stake. Every payment notification, every insurance premium, if it had my name on it, it went into a growing digital folder. I printed it all out and filled a 3-ring binder with tabs labeled Deed, Mortgage, Insurance, and Will Amendments. But paper alone wouldn't win in court. I needed witnesses. So I turned to Aunt Maria, the one family member who'd always had my back. I told her, I need you to remember how Mom and Dad always called the house Alex's future legacy, and she didn't hesitate to jot down her recollections in a notarized affidavit. I walked next door to Mr. Chen, our retired neighbor, and reminded him of that summer barbecue when Dad looked proud and said, I hope this home stays with Alex one day. He agreed to a written statement too. Money for legal fees was another hurdle. I opened a separate litigation fund account and quietly diverted 10% of each paycheck. I also applied for a local mediation grant my attorney mentioned. If we could settle without full litigation, it would save thousands. All the while, I leaned on my therapist twice a week, because taking on your parents is as emotionally brutal as it sounds. And in an online support group, I found others who'd navigated similar betrayals, practical tips on court etiquette, advice on deposition prep, even encouragement when I doubted myself. By the end of that fortnight, I wasn't just a wronged son, I was a co-owner who had assembled a rock-solid case. The binder on my desk felt heavy, but it was proof that I was ready to fight for what was mine. I'll never forget that gray Wednesday morning, sitting in a bland conference room with my parents on one side of the long table and me on the other. Between us, our attorneys and a professional mediator, whose sole job was to guide us toward a resolution. The entire house of cards my parents planned to hand my half of our family home to Jake was about to collapse. We just want what's best for the family. Dad nodded, adding, Jake needs a fresh start, and this seemed like a fair way to help him. The mediator glanced at them, then at my binder, an inch-thick stack of deeds, bank statements, affidavits from Aunt Maria and Mr. Chen, email chains, and screen grabs. My lawyer spoke next. Every one of these documents shows Alex's legal and emotional investment in the property. Any transfer without his voluntary consent constitutes undue influence. My mom shifted in her seat. I could feel my heart thumping as the mediator asked her directly, "Did you ever discuss these changes with Alex before drafting the agreement?" "No, not really." That admission was the first crack. The mediator called for a short break, then he quietly asked Jake to stay behind. I watched, baffled, as my half-brother remained while the rest of us stepped into the hallway. Jake looked uneasy. He fidgeted with the sleeve of his sweatshirt, hardly the model of entitlement I'd been led to expect. When the mediator left, Jake leaned forward. In a low voice, he said, "Alex, I never wanted your share of the house. Mom and Dad kept telling me it was mine to help me get on my feet, but it just felt wrong. I'd rather you keep it or we sell it and split everything 3 ways." I knew Jake had struggled, but I never imagined he'd push back against my parents' scheme. His genuine regret and loyalty in that moment shifted the entire dynamic. Back in the room, the mediator cleared his throat. Given Mr. Jake's statement and Ms. Diane's admission of no prior discussion with Alex, he said, peering over his glasses, it's clear this proposed transfer is neither voluntary nor properly informed. He turned to my parents, I recommend you rescind this agreement immediately and allow the property to remain in its current shared ownership. My mom's face drained of color. Dad stammered something about fairness, but the mediator pressed on. Family gifts must be given freely. This is clearly under undue influence and must be voided. Within minutes, our attorneys drafted a simple stipulation: the deed transfer clause would be struck, and both sides would cover their own legal costs. The mediator outlined a plan for future conversations should either side wish to sell the house. We do so with full transparency and mutual consent. And the person I thought was the beneficiary turned out to be my unexpected ally. Walking out of that building, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. My parents' scheme had spectacularly collapsed, and I emerged with both my share of the house and a newfound respect for my half-brother. Walking out of that mediation room felt like stepping into bright sunlight after being trapped underground. My parents were quiet, Jake gave me a tentative thumbs up, and I realized that the worst was and wasn't behind us. Here's how things unfolded in the weeks and months that followed. My parents called a family meeting the next Sunday. No lawyers, just us around the dining table. Mom's eyes were red, Dad looked chagrined. They finally admitted they'd been overwhelmed by guilt over Jake's setbacks and let their panic drive them to push me aside. Mom's apology: she said she'd let her good intentions become selfish impulses. She asked if I could ever forgive her. Dad's promise: he vowed to involve me in any major decision moving forward. He also set up a small family fund I helped manage, so decisions would feel more collaborative. I told them forgiveness would take time. Actions, not words, would prove their sincerity. Surprisingly, Jake and I grew closer. He confessed that he'd been mortified by his parents' plan. He never wanted the house, just a fresh start. We started hanging out again, weekend barbecues, impromptu carpentry projects in the garage, even co-hosting a charity 5K for local college scholarships, a nod to his unfinished education. He's now saving up for community college, and I've agreed to help him find internships and housing, on his terms. With the mediator's help, we drafted a simple, written agreement. If any of us want to sell the house, we give 6 months' notice and split proceeds equally. Any major renovations or loans against the property require unanimous written consent. A quarterly, family check-in, to revisit finances, make sure no one feels left out. No more surprises, just clear boundaries and shared responsibility. On my end, I kept seeing a therapist to process the betrayal and learn healthy ways to assert boundaries. I also set up automatic bill payments in my name only and kept a modest escrow fund for legal contingencies just in case. It felt oddly empowering to take back control of my finances and my peace of mind. Today, I drive down my tree-lined street and feel that old warmth returning. The house is still our house, in the truest sense, a place where disappointments happened, but also forgiveness and laughter. My parents and I aren't back to where we were 10 years ago, and maybe we never will be, but we're rebuilding, brick by brick. Jake and I have even joked about turning the loft into a workshop for his woodworking classes. My parents have finally learned that family first means all of us, not just the person who seems the most needy in the moment. TLDR, after my parents tried to give my half of our home to my half-brother, I fought back in mediation and won. We've since built new agreements, healthier boundaries, and even patched up our relationships, stronger and wiser than before. Family can wound you, but it can also heal you, if you let it.